Have you ever watched a movie and immediately knew it was going to be one of your absolute favorite films of all time? Those films that you obsessively show everybody you know, randomly quote at strangers, and when you're in a bad emotional place, they're the first film you reach for to lift your spirits? In 1996, a film was released that left that impression on me the minute I finished it. That film was Peter Jackson's underrated Frighteners. Blending horror and comedy, it was the perfect film to make me become the horror buff that I am today. This is Matt Kelly of Geekscape and the Horror Movie Night podcast, and we are celebrating 25 years of Frighteners. But first, if you haven't already, click the subscribe button on Geekscape TV. We're going to do a bit of a revamp of the channel over the next month, and if you'd like to see more videos like this one, then please like, share, and comment on this video. Now, back to the video. In 1996, I had watched a handful of horror movies as a kid, but I never considered myself a horror fan. I had a weird fascination with the big animal films like Jaws, as well as the Jaws ripoffs like Alligator and Piranha, but in general, my experiences with horror almost exclusively were watching Universal classics with my grandfather and staring at the box art in the Blockbuster horror aisle. When I saw Frighteners, it sparked an interest in me. I had to share the film with my cousin David because I knew that he was a horror buff, and he in return introduced me to Scream. When I watched Scream, it was undeniable that from that point I was a horror fan. But it was Frighteners that gave me the courage to dip my toes in the water before diving head first. Frighteners was a box office disappointment at the time of its release, just barely making back its budget. It wouldn't surprise me if you had never heard of it. It's possible that I would have never heard of it had it not been for one thing. I was a very boring child. I used to spend an absurd amount of time watching infomercials or watching the TV guide scroll or just watching pay-per-view advertisements. And it was on pay-per-view that I heard of this film. I probably would have ignored its existence if it wasn't for the fact that I was such a big Back to the Future fan. I was obsessed with the Back to the Future films as well as the cartoon series. Because of that, I was also obsessed with Michael J. Fox. I'm confident that I was the only student at my school who by junior high had watched Teen Wolf, Doc Hollywood, Life with Mickey, Greedy, and every episode of Spin City. If Michael J. Fox was in it, then I had to see it, even if it was a horror movie. A few days later, when my family went to Blockbuster, I asked to rent it. It is still to this day one of the few horror films that I can watch with my mom because she likes it as much as I do. But yet, the film is still painfully underrated. How did a film like this even happen? Well, it goes back to 1987, when a New Zealand man named Peter Jackson gathered together his friends to make a movie. It took 4 years of weekend shoots, but eventually he completed the film Bad Taste, a film that is as gross and offensive as it is impressively made for how small the budget clearly was. The film was well received enough for Jackson to make a few more low-budget films like Meet the Feebles and Brain Dead, also known as Dead Alive, which all have become cult classics. In a twist that no one could predict, this man, whose career was almost entirely made up of splatter films, wrote Heavenly Creatures with his co-writer Fran Walsh. The film had a notable change in tone for Jackson, focusing more on character and mood and less on exploding limbs and ripping out rib cages. The film was nominated for an Academy Award for Best Original Screenplay and made multiple end-of-the-year top 10 lists. Most importantly, though, it opened the door for Jackson to make his first big-budget Hollywood film. Frighteners originally was an idea between him and Fran while working on Heavenly Creatures. The film was intended to be a Tales from the Crypt feature, but upon reading the script, producer Robert Zemeckis thought that it was better suited as a standalone film. The script even awarded Jackson with total artistic control and final cut privileges. So what is Frighteners about? Well, the film follows Frank Bannister, who after his wife dies in a car accident that he survived, gains the ability to see and speak to ghosts. The town believes that Frank killed his wife due to her body being found with the number 13 carved in her forehead, assumedly from Frank's missing hunting knife. Despite all of this assumed guilt, the lack of evidence leads to Bannister being a free man, but one who lives alone as a recluse con man. Frank makes his money by giving ghosts free lodging at his house, away from their militantly ran graveyard, in exchange for them haunting homes of the rich so that he can be hired to exorcise the house. Unfortunately for Frank, there's a rogue Grim Reaper crushing people's hearts and killing anyone who's come in touch with Frank, indirectly framing him. The film boasts an impressive collection of special effects, some pretty good scares, and an incredibly smart and funny screenplay. Michael J. Fox is the perfect casting for this film, coming off as witty and infinitely likable and very easy to empathize with. And shockingly, a lot of the CGI looks pretty good. That is excluding the ghost in the wall effects, which I thought looked cheesy even as a kid. Danny Elfman's score is fantastic and avoids sounding like his usual evil circus sounds that we're so used to hearing from him. This was the film that introduced Jeffrey Combs into my life as well as the sadistic FBI agent Milton Dammers. He steals every scene that he's in with a strange cadence behind every single line he delivers and a laundry list of issues that he is constantly attempting to overcome. I could spend another 20 minutes just telling you about this movie in detail, but I'd rather you experience the ride for yourself. This is one of those rare situations where I actually prefer the theatrical cut over the director's cut, but that could just be familiarity and the comfort of something that you've watched 100 times speaking. Frighteners introduced me to the type of horror film that I would love. It's very difficult for me to fully love the hyper-serious A24 style of horror film because my true comfort zone is in more lighthearted fare. Films that will make me smile and laugh, be it intentionally or unintentionally. Frighteners was well received despite being a box office disappointment. But even if every critic on the planet hated it, I would still love it. It falls into the same category as things like Scrubs reruns and ska music. It's this relic of a time in my life when I could turn to movies and TV and music to comfort me. You know, in a lot of ways, this is almost like a thesis for the Geekscape YouTube channel because it's all about celebrating what makes us love media. Frighteners is an active piece of my personality. I think about it constantly. I share it with the people that I love. I quote it nonstop, and I buy worthless crap like this novelization, which doesn't really follow any of the plot points of the movie. Is it possible that if I'd never seen this movie, my life would be exactly the same, except that I'd have one less DVD in my collection? It's possible, but I don't personally want to find out. Bit dramatic, but I think it's a good ending.